Gotcha.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another Monster Hunter World video. This is Thegameconomist, and today I wanted to make a prioritized list of tips for new players who might have just gotten the game for Christmas. I've put 2,000 hours into Monster Hunter World at this point, and these are the things I wish somebody else had told me when I was getting started. Before we begin, I want to mention that this list may have minor spoilers in it. For example, I'll probably list a monster that you haven't seen before, but I'm going to intentionally not give you any more details than you need, and I won't use any images or footage of those monsters, so it's going to be pretty safe. Tip number 1, you can play the whole game solo, but you don't have to. Getting into multiplayer in Monster Hunter World is unusually complicated compared to most modern AAA games. When I started, I really didn't play any multiplayer at all until after I'd finished the entire story, and that's mostly just because it seems so unintuitive that I didn't feel bothered to learn how multiplayer works until I had nothing else to do. I also ended up regretting doing this because it's actually a lot of fun having someone help you when you're stuck on something really tough, like a tough quest. Basically, at some point in the campaign, you're told that you can use an SOS flare to bring in random teammates. I'll show you where that is in the menu. The SOS flares are only usable after the quest has started, and they're somewhat hidden away in the tabs of your menu. So now you know if you're ever stuck in a quest, you can send out a flare and get some multiplayer help. The other thing I want to explain really quickly is how to use a session. Basically, a session is just like having people join you as a host, or you're joining them, and you can have 16 people in a session at one time. Sessions are useful for getting people together before the quest starts, as opposed to using an SOS flare after the quest starts. See what I'm saying? So you can get 4 people to get a quest started and everybody readies up together, and you all start the quest together, as opposed to an SOS flare where you're by yourself and you're like, you know, this is tough, I'm going to use an SOS flare, and then randoms join you. See, two very different versions of multiplayer. Sessions are also going to be something you'll have to eventually learn if you want to participate in the Kolfteroth Siege, one of the most important monsters in the game to fight for new gear. One of the reasons that you have these two different approaches to multiplayer, that is the SOS flares and sessions, is because, well, basically you can host a session, but it's unlikely that people are going to join it unless you already have kind of a decent number of people in your session. There's this phenomenon that occurs where people who are searching for a session only want to join a session that's mostly already full, right? So if you don't have a lot of friends already jumping into your hosted session, you could just find randoms with an SOS flare. That's kind of the two major differences between them. And typically, when you're creating a session that you expect only randoms to join, you're talking about a session that you put together to play in the arena, or to fight against Kolfteroth, or to fight against the Behemoth. If you're in some kind of Discord server, or some other kind of chat forum or chat room, you can share your session ID with others, which I'll show you on screen.
Hello.
And they can use this to join even if you haven't sent them any kind of game invite. Finally, the last thing I'll mention is that it helps to be part of a Discord server where you can quickly chat or text with people looking to do the same quest as you are. This is especially true when you reach the end game, where the monsters start to get really so difficult that it pretty much requires teamwork. There really is there's at least one monster where you pretty much have to have a team unless you're crazy good at the game. If you're looking for an active Discord full of players who are playing Monster Hunter World, my Discord has nearly 2,000 players in it now, and you can pop in and ask questions for help, or try to get to know some of the players who, you know, in the future would like to join up with you when the game gets really tough, or you could even ask them to help you out while you're still in the earlier parts of the game. You know, some of them are just happy to help. I'll leave a link in the description and the comment section for people who want to join this Discord. And really the reason multiplayer is what I opened up with, the reason it's such an important tip, is because the truth is you can learn things super quickly from people who are already very experienced and know how to play the game, right? Like, I started out describing the game as dense, as full of information. Well, some people have been playing it for so long that those people have like an encyclopedia of information. And when you play with them, they can just just fill your mind up with all the information you need. So multiplayer really is one of the best things you can do if you're just starting out the game. Tip number 2, how to pick a good weapon. This was a topic I was truly clueless about when I first started Monster Hunter World, and it's taken me like 2,000 hours to really have an idea of how the game is played and what weapon you should be playing with. A good weapon is whatever you think is cool, and that's the most important measurement. Capcom's rating of the weapon difficulty should have no impact on what weapon you start out with. I don't necessarily even agree with the ratings for those weapons. It's too subjective. For example, I think the Sword and Shield actually requires a lot of knowledge and practice in order to be able to kill a monster quickly. Whereas with the Gun Lance, if you can learn how to shell and reload properly, you can then rely on just that one tactic to win all of your fights. But Capcom claims that the Sword and Shield is easier than the Gun Lance. Either way, what's most important is that you enjoy how a weapon feels and looks, because you're going to be spending a lot of time using the same moveset over and over again, right? You can get bored of that. You'll end up spending your material rewards on making new weapons of the same weapon class. Once you get familiar with the weapon, you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to improve that weapon class, right? So it's important. It is kind of a long-term investment. You don't want to find yourself bored with the weapon you're using, or find yourself wishing you'd chosen the weapon you thought was cool, but you were trying to make a safe choice. Do you see what I'm saying? At least you don't want to do this in the mid-game. By the time you reach endgame, don't worry, you can easily jump to other weapon classes. If you're wondering which weapons I think are cheesiest, in my opinion, is going to be a competition between the heavy bowguns, the light bowguns, and the gun lances. But starting the game out, you're really not going to understand or appreciate why those weapons are so easy, and it's going to take you a while to really utilize their cheesiness anyways. If popularity matters to you, I have a video that I make every 2 months that shows off the current player usage for each of the weapon classes. You might be someone who just wants to use what everyone else is using, since it's probably the case that those weapon classes are popular for a reason. Or conversely, you might hate the idea of doing what everyone else is doing and choose to practice with a less popular weapon. I ended up starting the game out with the Lance because I enjoyed that weapon in Dark Souls 3. But the truth is, all of the weapons in Monster Hunter World feel very distinct from other games, so you're going to have a unique experience each time you try to use a different weapon class. I'll wrap tip 2 up by mentioning if you want to get a feel for a weapon's moveset, be sure to head to the training room and try out different weapon combinations on the wooden pillar there. Tip number 3, always eat at the canteen before you go out on a quest. When I started the game, I didn't like the idea of having to buff my character at the canteen for every single fight, but now that I've played the game much more, it would feel crazy if I didn't. The canteen buff is easily the most valuable buff in the game, even if it costs a tiny amount of your money and a little bit of time to go through the animation. The reason this buff is so strong is because the canteen can be used to max out your health, and this along with the health boost skill are the 2 largest improvements to your defense in the game, right? So you have the health boost from the canteen and the health boost skill. You kind of pair them together. There's also a lot more that you can do at the canteen. We're talking about feline food skills at this point, but it starts to get a little complicated, and I don't want you to feel fatigued from watching this guide like information overload. So probably a topping on the canteen deserves its own video. For now, let me just say this. I recommend eating the Chef's Choice platter. Is a combination of all of the freshest ingredients that you have available, so it's most likely going to activate the feline food skills, and that's a good thing. As a bonus tip, you should know that you can use max potions to boost your health the same way you would have boosted your health at the canteen. So if you die and you lose the canteen buff, you'll notice your health bar goes down. You can, if you can afford it, you can eat a max potion to bring your health bar back up. Alright, and this just popped up in my head. I want to share this bonus tip with you guys before we move on, because I feel like this is really important. You're going to eventually get an attack decoration, it'll be called an attack jewel, right? And what I want to tell you is don't sell those. They're one of the rarest and most valuable decorations in the game, and I still hear horror stories about new players who accidentally traded theirs in because they didn't know what they were doing. This isn't related to like defense or to the canteen. It just popped up in my head. I wanted to make sure I got it out there. Tip number 4, understanding survivability. Staying alive in the early game isn't actually too difficult. In fact, I feel like doing damage is the biggest challenge for the early game, since fights really do drag on if you don't know what you're doing. However, as you progress through the story, you're going to run into monsters who really do feel like hitting a wall. For some, this might be Anjanath, for others, this might be Diablos. And that would be for the early game. In the later game, there's also some really tough monsters who, once again, they'll feel like hitting a wall. So understanding defense is useful for fighting these monsters, since good defense, or should I say survivability, will keep you from carding, and eventually you'll defeat whatever it is you're fighting as long as you don't, as long as you don't triple cart and end the quest. So we already mentioned that you should eat at the canteen for a health buff. That's part of defense. The next thing you should do is build the health boost skill onto your setup as soon as you can. With the low rank armor, I'm not sure if you can get level 3 health boost, but I do know it becomes available right away in the high tier, right? So that's a little further along in the story. Health boost is the single largest increase in survivability, since it makes it unlikely that the monster can two-shot you. After health boost, the other skills I recommend are Divine Blessing and Fortify. So I've just told you the 3 strongest defensive skills in the game, and if you just build those, you're going to be really hard to kill. The last part to tip number 4 is that you should always be carrying 10 Mega Potions and 2 Max Potions in your inventory. In order to make sure you have these with you, you're going to need to quickly create an item loadout. It's not that hard, and you're going to want to save that, so that each time you're getting ready to go out into a quest, you can select that loadout and have those items placed into your pouch in a nice, organized manner. And so now you've eaten at the canteen, you've built Health Boost, Fortify, Divine Blessing, and you've created an item loadout that includes Mega Potions, Max Potions, and you're pretty much ready at that point for, well, in a very basic way, you're ready to trudge through any difficult fight in the game. Tip number 5 is going to be more related to, it's not direct damage, but it's about speeding up how fast you can finish a fight. Tip number 5, always capture monsters. When I started Monster Hunter World, probably what I remember the most is how damn long it took to win some of these fights. I barely did any damage, and each fight would drag on for like 20 minutes. In fact, back then I thought it was normal. This isn't too surprising when you start out, because you don't know which weapons are going to be the strongest in their weapon classes, meaning like for each weapon class you have like a whole bunch, you have like a pukey weapon, you have a bone weapon. You don't know which is better, right? You don't know how to skillfully use the movesets of those weapons. You aren't familiar with punishing the monsters that you are fighting for the first time, right? Like how to fight against them well. And you definitely aren't given the decorations or the armor needed to build for a lot of damage. So there is something you can do, though, that will dramatically increase the speed of most of your fights, and that's to capture literally every monster that you're allowed to capture. If you haven't figured out how to capture monsters, you will soon, because the game goes out of its way to teach you. After you've learned about it, the game will only occasionally require you to capture a monster, but the truth is, capturing is a mechanic that gives you all of the same rewards, but you also get done with your quest considerably faster than if you had just killed the monster. So that basically what it means is capturing's more valuable than killing. And that's because you're bypassing, the reason it's faster, you're bypassing a large chunk of the monster's health to end the fight with the trap, rather than having to work that health down with your weapon for a kill. To put into perspective how useful this is, I have all of the strongest equipment in the game, thousands of hours of experience, and I still choose to trap all of my targets because I know it's going to save me that much time. So if you have none of that good gear and you have none of the good experience, being able to effectively trap monsters is going to collectively save you hours of grinding. So just learn it. Learn how to trap, be good at it. Remember how we talked about item loadouts for tip number 4? Well, you're going to want to add a shock trap or pitfall trap, as well as 2 trank bombs. With the shock and pitfall traps, they're interchangeable. You can use either or. Also, I should mention, trank ammo exists for the bow guns. Those aren't necessary. You can just use trank bombs, but if you're using a bow gun, it's fun to use trank ammo. So you'll want to add those to your inventory loadouts, right? Once again, it comes back to loadouts. And when a monster is within the capture range, that is, when their health is low enough, you're going to walk up and finish the fight by capturing it. I think the hardest part for capturing monsters for me back then was just knowing when should I do it. and then kind of getting myself to stop attacking that monster and to get into another mindset where I accept that the fight is over because the monster is in capture range. I think when you're having fun, it's hard to remember that you're allowed to end the fight early and still get all of the same rewards. There are 3 signs a monster is ready to be captured. As monsters take damage, they'll drop red-colored slinger pods. If you keep a careful eye on them, counting them, you'll know that the monster is ready to be captured after they drop the 3rd slinger pods, right? 1, 2, and 3. This is the most advanced method because there are no other signs that the monster's health is low enough. The second sign is if you notice a small skull moving up in your radar over the monster. It's basically telling you that the monster is close to death, right? It just makes sense. And finally, the third and most obvious sign is when the monster starts to limp off to its nest in order to rest. If you can get ahead of the monster while it's limping away, you can just set the trap down and they'll walk right into it. Otherwise, it might be safest to follow the monster to the nest and set the trap down underneath the monster while it sleeps. Okay, it's about time to wrap things up. Let me hand out my last bonus tip. If, for some reason, you are not prepared to capture a monster, or you've run into a monster that can't be captured, be sure you always have 2 mega barrel bombs in your inventory so that you can barrel bomb them as they wake up. Just another thing to add to your item loadout, right? Two mega barrel bombs, traps, trank bombs, mega potions, max potions. Before we end things, let's do a brief review of all 5 tips so that they stick in your mind. Tip 1 was letting strangers join you with SOS flares, learning to create sessions, and finding experienced players on Discord who can easily answer your questions. Tip 2 was about picking a weapon that you enjoy rather than trying to overanalyze the game, as well as avoiding the belief that weapon difficulty is a big concern. It's really not. I also mentioned testing weapons out in the training room. In tip number 3, I emphasized the importance of the canteen. It is a complicated part of the game, so it's easy to shy away from it, but it's also the biggest buff you can get, and you should never skip eating a meal for any regular hunt. In tip number 4, I give you a priority list of how to survive against a monster, and we begin to talk a little bit about the importance of item loadouts. And finally, tip number 5 emphasizes the importance of capturing monsters, which is the best way to speed up your fights. The better you are at the game, the more likely you are using traps on every single Tier 1 and Tier 2 monster. If you're a new player and take a few minutes to get good at trapping, it will save you hours of agonizing grinding with low-rank weapons and low-rank armor. And that's the end of the tip list. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. I post something new almost every single day. Alright, I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.